Welcome back to the AI Revolution podcast and learning series. This is part of our AI in healthcare series, where today we'll focus on the important topic of responsible and ethical AI. What does it mean? What does it look like in practice? How can we measure it? I'm Carrie Purcell, and today I'm going to take a different seat, actually joining the panel as one of our expert contributors. So I'd like to introduce our host for this session, Matt Schnurr. Matt is the head of AI enablement at McKinsey Investments in Toronto, and he is tasked with thinking on and recommending solutions for the types of topics we'll discuss today. He also started his first podcast in 2019 and has since hosted and recorded well over 200 episodes across multiple shows. So we're lucky to have Matt here with us today. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks so much for having me as the guest host. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you, who I assume the audience knows fairly well as the regular host, but maybe we'll give you a couple of seconds to introduce yourself more broadly and what you do. And then we also have Sue Jella, who's joining as well. Carrie, why don't you start with a quick intro, and then we'll move to Sue on what you're up to as well.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. So yes, anybody who's been listening to our series knows that I often host the podcast. I have a podcast company, but importantly for this conversation, I'm also founder and CEO of Insight Research Group and AI Labs, where we focus on AI research, innovation, development, exploration for companies of all sizes. And a lot of that work fits in with my doctoral research in responsible AI. So in my doctoral research, I really do focus on responsible and ethical AI for small and medium-sized businesses primarily, although the conversations can get quite broad. The last piece that I'll add, which our audience probably has heard, is as part of my research work, I do a lot of authorship, and I am a co-author on the AI Revolution book, which is also how Sue Jella and I have connected. So that might be a nice chance to hand it over to Sue.
Great. Sue.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Carrie, and hi to your audience. Thank you so much for having me on today's show. So yes, I'm also one of the co-authors of the AI Revolution, and it's been so fantastic collaborating and working with a suite of experts globally. And just for your audience, none of us have ever met in person. We've basically worked really hard together, just on a virtual basis, remotely, and we've brought together this fantastic book that was a best-selling book in 3 different countries for a couple of weeks. So I highly encourage everyone to grab a copy and learn more from the experts. Yes, so a bit about myself. I've been in data and AI analytics, transformation, cybersecurity now for over 15 years. A lot of what I've done has been to enable and support organizations to leverage their data assets to the best of their ability. So really decluttering chaos to more insights, recommendations, and strategically driven capabilities. So at the moment, I am working with an organization as an executive and advisor to really uplift and understand the intersection of cybersecurity, data, and AI, and how governance fits into that entire ecosystem. Now, everyone's obviously more aware of cybersecurity now with the constant threats that we face on a daily basis, but also the important role that data and AI plays in ensuring you're cyber safe, you have sufficient education and understanding of how to be cyber safe, but also, more importantly, what happens if you're hacked? What happens if you're under threat? And as we know, it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And as AI progresses and matures, cyber threats also progress and mature. And the reality is, a cybercrime is always going to be 10 steps ahead of the reality. So part of what I'm trying to advocate for is to really build robust and safe governance as well as strategic cyber initiatives to secure individuals, but also organizations.
That's a really wonderful intro on what you do, and I'd love to sort of stick with that for my first question. Maybe less on the cybersecurity side, but certainly on data and AI. And thinking about responsible and ethical AI, one thing that you hear time and time again is bias. Bias in the training set, bias in the training data, and that sort of it's the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon. I'd love to hear from you just how much of an issue you do think the bias in the underlying data is, and any ways to think about how to address that.
Yeah. Do you want to go, Carrie, or should I?
Oh, Sue, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a big issue. And I think it's getting better over time. But if you think about just a few years ago, the biases were stuck. And even when generative AI became a thing in 2021, 2022, biases were there. And interestingly, the amount of training you have to do, not just from a technical programmatic perspective, but actually from a psychology perspective, is quite high. And the reality is, to have the best data sets in place, you need to have diversity in skills and diversity in understanding and social circles as well, social phenomena as well, as part of those biases. A lot of consumers who are utilizing generative AI tools or AI in general are using it as advisory services. They're using generative AI to advise them on what to do next, be it personal, be it professional. So biases needs to really be a part of considering every individual need. And we're not there yet. We have, 78 billion people in the world. And I don't think generative AI has matured enough to understand the individualistic needs of everyone to provide that really tailored approach. Things like tone of voice, words, understanding how to curate content for a specific individual. None of that has really been tailored to a personalized level. Yes, it's fantastic. There's zettabytes of data out there, and that can take a good few million years to download in total. But the reality is, it's not specific enough. When we talk about biases, we have to take into consideration ethics. How do people leverage this data? We also have to take into consideration what are the regulations per country, per person, per state, as part of, again, feeding back to the audience a result. Have all of these been considered in generative AI? Not yet. It's not quite there. And how quickly do those models change as regulation changes, as people adopt generative AI much more quickly? Not much again. If you use two different tools, you may get slightly different answers, but the underlying models are actually just being rinsed and repeated. So again, for biases to really be considered, you need a suite of experts, a suite of skills, as well as opinions to really train those models. And I don't think that's really being considered by every company or every organization. I would say the leading tech organizations, they probably are bringing that into their models. But the fact that you are rinsing and repeating makes it much, much harder. Also bear in mind, there's a difference between large language models and small language models. And organizations that adopt large language models are missing the piece that actually is more bespoke and personalized to an organization's need. And so, again, we really have to think about what is the fit for purpose model for my organization, but also how do I secure and manage my data within my own ecosystem, so that the results that are being generated are very specific to an organizational problem or an individual problem. And the only way to do that is to consider the biases as well as the transparency and explainability of those models.
So am I reading between the lines correctly to suggest that on the enterprise versions, at least, small language models would allow for some additional training, some bias, I don't know if correction is the right word, but at least bias management or something along those lines. And for the larger consumer-based large language models, that's going to be more of an entrenched challenge that you're relying on the big tech companies to lean into to try to solve. Is that a fair summarization, Sue?
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely right. Especially if you again drill down back into the organizations and them trying to solve a problem for their organizational problem.
Right.
A small language model is definitely more effective. And there's more research and more studies coming out as to why a small language model can deliver more bespoke and personalized services. And that's correct because you're training it just based on your instance and the situation of your specific ecosystem or environment. A large
Right.
language model is actually, at the end of the day, it's very generic. It's very
Sure.
general. It's not necessarily considering all the elements and all the external factors that impact decision making. So, again, definitely working out what's a more suitable model is going to be really important. The other thing I'd like to add is that one of the key things to bear in mind is that generative AI is accessible. It's more accessible now. And so the broad majority of consumers who leverage this capability are using it because it's more accessible. But we need to remember AI has existed for quite some time. And it's not new, it's over 50 years old. It's just something that sits in the background that may not necessarily be seen by the naked eye. But generative AI obviously is far more accessible and you feel like, you're getting a result really quickly. But there's a lot of programmatic work that goes on in the background. But there's also a lot
Sure.
of expertise that you need to review and test the models to ensure that it generates the right information. You need evaluators, testers, trainers, prompt engineers, roles that never existed about 5 years ago, to actually ensure that the result that you're generating is relevant, but also, more importantly, safe. And as we know, there have been lots of horror stories out there about the unsafe use of generative AI. So now the thinking has to be very much around the safe use of generative AI.
That's great, Carrie. Maybe I'll turn to you, and we'll keep on this thread of, I guess, societal uses and regulation in general. I would say if we look at the globe and how different governments are trying to regulate AI, very fractured. What's your view on, I guess, regulation and its ability to be positively impactful on sort of the ethics and responsible use of AI?
Yeah, I mean, big question. I think the very short answer would be that it has the ability to have a very strong impact on responsible and ethical AI. But the reality today is that regulation is lagging innovation, right? We have a lot of exciting development happening very quickly. And in many cases, it is outpacing current regulation. It is stressing our current understanding of even AI ethics from the past multiple decades. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But it really becomes a puzzle of, that tension between regulation and innovation will always exist. There are strong arguments for getting regulation right will actually increase the speed of innovation, right? If you can put those
Right.
guardrails in place, if you can safely put that framework out there, people will be able to just run. At the same time, I mean, as this regulation is getting updated, it could be slow to update. There's a lot of bureaucracy that we can encounter, but the risks can be absolutely enormous. And we know that those are the ones that, this series is going to fit into healthcare. So those risks are life and death in most cases. There are also the risks that we see in the headlines on the news, right? So when AI goes wrong, when that innovation goes too far without regulation, it is life and death. It is very, very high risk. So that responsibility piece is so important. I'll pause, but if you'd like, I could talk a little bit about the regulation puzzle and kind of where we are, or I can pause and you let us know where we should go next.
Sure. Maybe we'll stick with principles and regulation, but I guess I'm thinking instead of the regulation puzzle, I'm thinking of the drivers of that regulation. And AI has certainly become more of a topic. Political parties, political leanings. I sit here in Canada, we are heavily influenced by our friends down south, and you can already see that the midterms coming next year, AI is a big topic with Bernie Sanders taking positions, Republicans taking positions, all these things coming together, and concerns around data center construction, and particularly I've seen lots of headlights on electricity use, water usage, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe address that narrow issue first on the electrical and the draw and the impact to that local community, and then maybe try to link that back to the patchwork of regulation and what it might mean from a macro
Yeah.
perspective.
So it's interesting. I'll start, and I certainly, if Sue wants
Yeah, great.
to chime in, I'd be happy for that. But interestingly, we have a co-author in the AI Revolution book who I have interviewed recently, who is a sustainability expert. And at the beginning of his chapter, I'll borrow a few of his metrics because they are impressive, if not concerning. So he says it's estimated that to deliver AI algorithms, we will need to produce 1,000 terawatt hours to possibly 5,000 terawatt hours of new electricity to power the new data centers. That represents the electricity to power Japan or possibly the United States. To cool those servers, the data centers will use a lot more water, up to 6.6 billion cubic meters of water. To an estimated 500 milliliters of water to be consumed every 5 to 10 responses coming out of your favorite Gen AI tool. Absolutely staggering, very, very hard to maintain. I'm not a sustainability expert, but I did have the chance so this is Arnaud Blandin. I did have a chance to interview him recently, and he pulled out a really nice example of looking at DeepSeek in China and the fact that if you are pushed to create more efficient models, we can, right? We aren't seeing it yet today, but we do have that ability in front of us, and it is something that we really need to grab onto, right? It is something that we need to take seriously. So certainly on the the societal, the sustainable, the water consumption, the energy consumption, it is an issue. Again, I won't speak as an expert on the ESG side as much as to briefly comment on. It is an area that is highly measured, and it is an area that is changing constantly, right? So people are commonly pulling up metrics that might be 6 months old or a year old, and a lot of these companies are working very quickly to try to change those metrics. It's not always successful, but we are measuring them and we are looking at them. And there are models and possibilities for how we can approach that in a more sustainable way for positive societal impact.
Sue, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I did. The other thing I think we need to take note of and also consider is the evolution or the innovation that everyone's talking about, which is AI factories. And already some of that is in production, right? And the consumption and the sustainability of that is going to become extremely high. And I don't know if we have any measurement metrics around what that's going to cost us from an environmental perspective. So again, we really need to consider the use and how we want to leverage these capabilities. The reality is AI is not going anywhere. It's just going to progress. It's going to mature. It's going to become bigger. But again, how sustainable is that for our environment when we already have a struggling environment? And water is a commodity. There's, hundreds of locations in the world that do not have accessible water. And so how are we going to ensure now that this becomes an accessibility for others whilst we still continue to innovate, continue to evolve AI? So yeah, there's a really big ethical and responsible use of these capabilities. What I would like the audience to take away as well is to really consider at what point should you be using AI? Because you don't want it to replace human intelligence, but you also need to use it for efficiency. But at what point do you want to use it for efficiency? And so when I think about healthcare, I still think leveraging human healthcare intelligence is important. Every time you try to run a query to assess your own healthcare needs and, you want to use Dr. AI, I think it's going to be really challenging. The environmental impact on that without knowing for sure you either have a health condition or you don't is, again, going to become a really big issue. Some of the other controversies or conversations in the market is around mental health and using AI to provide advice on mental health. And again, we have to be really, really careful with this. And the reason why this is, again, a really serious and important topic in healthcare is that leveraging AI to decide on your future and your well-being is probably not the right approach. And so both from a sustainability perspective, but also from a well-being perspective, AI is not meant to solve that problem, and it shouldn't be providing that advice. And also, if you think about the risks of data loss from leveraging AI for healthcare on serious conditions or serious issues, you're probably going to be in a much deeper situation in trying to resolve that than if a healthcare professional tried to address that issue. And by that, I mean, there's absolutely no penalties for data loss through technology or AI products. And so in healthcare, if your AI tool leaks your data, they're not going to be penalized. But if a doctor or healthcare professional does, they lose their license. So again, you really have to look at what point do us as humans need to use it for ourselves versus our organizations, but also at what point do you really probably trust human intelligence versus AI intelligence that is still maturing. It's not to say you shouldn't use it. It's more about when should you be using it. So really think about that as well as part of the evolution of sustainability, but also trust.
I guess maybe just to pick up on your mental health point and push back a little bit, you made a strong case for humans being the primary giver of mental health, which I think is most people would probably agree with. But there are millions of people who have no access to therapy or can't afford access to therapy or that type of thing. Large language models have been proven to be potentially helpful, I will say, in those particular scenarios. Feel free to reject the premise if you want. But what's your thinking on like that balance between filling in where there's literally no alternative for an individual versus the prioritization of care, human care?
It's a really interesting question because if they can't access healthcare or education or basic amenities, what are their chances of being able to access the internet or an AI model or even understand how it works? So again, if you're looking at developing areas, there's hundreds of areas in the world that do not have access to digitization or digital assets or digital technology. So if they don't have access to basic things like healthcare, I doubt they're going to have access to digital technology. That's one thing. In saying so, if there were more developed countries with regional areas that have a lack of access to healthcare, and they did have digital technology access, that scenario obviously does exist, you would need to leverage both competencies. And that being, you have to augment the approach, augment the decision making. Do not rely completely on the results of AI to provide the next step in your health. It needs to be augmented with a professional as well. But also you have to be extremely careful around how that's being leveraged. So I'm not averse to using it at all. It's more about how do you trust the decisions and make those decisions a part of your life. And I think it's really important that if you are utilizing it for healthcare-based scenarios, definitely seek the help of a professional as well to provide you with a conclusion or provide you with an end goal of what your healthcare needs should be.
Great. Carrie, anything to add?
Yeah, so I can add a little bit of context from my point of view in Canada, right? So in Canada, we have a very, very large geographical space. Our population, it does not fill that space, but it means that those areas that are not well populated do, particularly in the conversation of healthcare, it can be a lot harder to access healthcare. It could be a lot longer of a drive to get to healthcare and so on. So we do see some examples in Canada that are interesting that are using AI to try to support rural communities, particularly in healthcare. I will not address, I'll put the mental health piece aside, right? I don't think, I think there's a lot of risk around that, and I won't counter Sue's perspective, and I won't add to Matt's perspective. But in terms of accessing healthcare expertise, Sue did caution against AI doctors. I do think that caution is important. But I do also believe where this conversation started around sustainability, the idea of being able to get an early triage, an early diagnostic on whether a hospital visit is required, on whether a doctor's visit is required, in rural neighborhoods can make a big difference. The other piece that we are recovering from, and we're certainly not unique in Canada, but we are still in a post-COVID recovery in healthcare. Our hospitals are overwhelmed. We have a huge advantage of having public healthcare, but that does mean that emergency wait times are very high. Certainly, people are triaged, but it's a very high wait time. Getting a family doctor, unfortunately, the stats are staggering for how many Canadians don't have their own personal family doctor. They may have access to walk-in clinics, to emergency rooms, but they don't have, they don't have their own doctors. So looking at AI support, looking at AI triaging, looking at telehealth and telemedicine, those are things that really do have a place to explore in Canada right now. So not to negate the risk and the fact that we do have to be very careful about it, but whether it's within that solving a market need, whether it's within that sustainability conversation of driving or environmental impact, whether it is really just looking at trying to take some of the pressure off of our hospitals and our doctors, there is an interesting solution there, and some of the pilots I do think will be successful.
Great context. I think I'll move now to maybe the primary. I would say fear from the general public of AI. When I say general public, I mean me too. But job loss. These tools are extremely capable of automating many things that weren't previously eligible to automation. What is the right perspective on the sort of responsible and ethical use of AI when it comes to people's jobs? Maybe I'll start with you, Carrie.
Sure. So when, in my work, when I go into an organization and I look at AI opportunities, AI optimizations, we do a pain and gain measurement, right? So we do weigh a whole lot of factors, obviously including, ROI, but also looking at job loss, also looking at sustainability, also looking at legal and ethical risks. So job loss is a factor that we look at. If you just, I don't know if I want to say that Sue and I might share this perspective, but I'll let her speak for herself. If you just asked me, right, myself, what my fear is on job loss, I don't think that it is something we have to fear today en masse, right? I have always taken the perspective before Gen AI became just in our hands as an everyday accessible tool. I've always been of the mindset of looking for efficiency in a workplace and saying, hey, if I could get you 20% of your time back, what would you do with that? Everybody has an answer. Everybody could use more than 20% of their time. So if we are wise and responsible about how we look at those AI optimization opportunities within our organizations, we will find ways that support people, that support workers, that support humans in efficiency, in repetitive tasks, likely in things that they actually don't enjoy doing, and they may not even be the most skilled at doing. To give them back time to do those things that we can't have AI do today. I don't know about the future, but certainly not today. So I see it as an empowerment tool. Again, this conversation will continue to come back to responsible and ethical use. So it does have to be considered carefully, but I absolutely see it as an optimization, as a support for humans, and I think it's an amazing time ahead of us. And maybe I'll just close by saying, we're in the midst of the transformation, right? Things are going to look different. They're going to look different next year. They're certainly going to look different in 5 or 10 years. And we can't anticipate all of those changes. So I will not pretend that jobs won't change. They absolutely will. But I do think that we have the opportunity to be at the forefront of how those jobs change, of holding on to our roles and saying, this is what AI can do for me. This is how it can look different. So that's really where I come from when I say we shouldn't be afraid of job loss. There will be change, but it is a very exciting opportunity.
Sue, anything to add?
Yeah, totally agree with you, Carrie, on par with everything. I don't think we need to fear that. I agree. I would just like to take a step back into the last, 20 years, for example, or even prior to that. Remember the days where we used to have mechanical human beings switchboard calls to each other from one location to another. Sure. Those roles no longer exist, right? But we've optimized the way we communicate through that, and technology helped to optimize the way we reach out to each other and converse with each other. Similarly, more jobs have been created through that, through the evolution of technology. And so, yeah, you don't really need a human to switchboard you from one place to another. But you do need people to manage the network, to manage the way the network reaches out to people. So in Australia, there is an understanding that there will be 200,000 AI-related jobs created by 2030. And that's pretty good. If you really think about it, there's a lot of opportunity to pivot, to upskill, to grow yourself, to learn something new that will make you relevant for a job over the next 5 years. There used to be a time when the dot-com revolution, e-commerce, and all the digital tools that we're using was going to replace every job in the world. It hasn't. It actually hasn't. It's augmented jobs in the world. Yes, there are jobs that no longer exist. Totally agree with that. But that's how the Industrial Revolution has been, is that you progress. And when you progress, you try to make life a lot easier. But in saying so, if we go back to the issue around time and wanting to have more time back, despite having AI around for the last 4 to 5 years, everyone's still time poor. Most of us are still running into meetings that go in overtime, and we don't have, a dollar value or a monetary value associated to the time consumed in a meeting. If anything, we're busier. So I don't see that jobs are going to go away and we're not going to have any roles. I just think we have to change the way we approach those roles. We're going to have to change the way we start to market ourselves into opportunities. So if anything, one of the things I like to advocate for is continuous learning. And so that means what you maybe did 10 years ago may not necessarily be relevant, but it doesn't mean you as a person are irrelevant. It just means you have to pivot, and you have to find what that pivot should be and could be. And so I think it's really important, again, to be agile, to be creative. There's a lot of things AI can't do. AI can't be curious. It can only execute on what you ask it to execute. You still have to have the human intelligence to ask the right prompt to generate the right result. So, if anything, prompt engineering is probably a role that people should think about. So, I don't think we should let the fear factor really impact us. I really don't.
Maybe I'll stick with the point and just ask a follow-up, Sue. You rightly pointed to the previous industrial revolutions, and jobs go away. They're replaced by plenty of other jobs, frequently more engaging. I mean, the man shoveling coal to power the steam generator is probably more comfortable today doing something less manual. However, the transition times can be relatively difficult as people look to reskill, retrain, that type of thing. Do you think that there should be any obligation put on either firms or government or education behind sort of this reskilling of individuals, or is it kind of too broad of an issue and really incumbent on the individual to find their own way?
Absolutely. I think, again, it's a social responsibility of the government as well as organizations to encourage and support continuous learning. And the fact that, at the end of the day, education can't be replaced. And so, as we talk about in healthcare as well, doctors are constantly learning about new diseases and resolving them. Research is currently being undertaken for a variety of issues in healthcare, right? So do we stop that? Do we start to think, I don't want to do any more research on cancer? I don't want to do any more research on eye health or mental health? No, we don't. Because it's continuous learning. If you don't learn and if you don't interact with experts and scientists, you're not going to solve the problem. So similarly, if you're looking at a non-healthcare based issue, you have to constantly learn and educate yourself. And funding needs to be put towards that. And I think this is the other issue in many global environments, is that there's not enough funding towards education. And so we need to start looking at how education can evolve both from someone who's just finished school to someone who wants to upskill and take the next step in their career. And again, if you look at a lot of job ads, I'm assuming it's kind of similar in the American region as well, is that organizations are not willing to invest in training. And that's why graduates struggle to find roles, because most of the time the feedback they have is you have insufficient experience. But if you don't get a job, you're not going to get experience. So how do you resolve that problem? You have to invest in training. So it's the same for experienced professionals as well. Just because you invest in training, it doesn't mean the employee or staff member will leave the organization. It's actually a benefit to the organization that you can get innovative thinking and you can optimize and make processes or issues in the organization more efficient. So at the end of the day, we need to ask, what is the organizational problem we're trying to solve, and how can the people who work here, who understand the business, solve that problem? And that may need, either more training programs, workshops, or learning to help them resolve that problem. So yeah, we need to evolve. That's what I believe.
Makes a lot of sense, and addresses a question I didn't ask, which is seeing a number of people who are recent grads and the employment figures come down. People are attributing some of that, at least, to Gen AI. So the corporate training program and just having to invest in people certainly makes a lot of sense for that pipeline as well. Carrie, maybe I'll turn to you and talk about AI and the use of AI in the enterprise context. And I've heard these terms thrown around, and maybe you can help define the terms and think about when you use them, but it's human in the loop, human on the loop, and human, I think, out of the loop or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe define those terms and give a little bit of structure on how you can think about when each of those should apply.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really important question because I would venture to say people listening are familiar with human in the loop. We throw that term around a lot, and we use it as a safeguard when we say, we're not sure that AI, either this is a very high risk situation, right? Like in healthcare, a diagnosis is high risk, right? A false positive or a false negative can literally have life-threatening implications. So I don't want to trust an AI system, even if we feel that that it's showing me its confidence rating, right? Even if it has a very high confidence rating, et cetera. So it may be very transparent. It may be doing all the right things, but it's still such a high risk situation that I'm not going to trust an AI system on its own. So human in the loop is a safeguard where we're going to say, I'm going to bring an expert like a doctor in. We might use this AI system. It might have and it might take x-rays, or it might take blood results, or it may take a whole host of data points together and give us very, very advanced suggestions or potential diagnoses. But I'm going to have an expert like a doctor come in and have the oversight to use this. So we would call that a decision support tool. We're not, even if we think that tool is actually capable of diagnoses, we won't allow it to have that responsibility or that autonomy without a doctor coming in and saying, yes, I agree. No, I don't. Let's test a few more things. But I validated it as a doctor, as a human in the loop of that decision. So that's a safeguard we use a lot. Now, it is a very important safeguard, right? The example that I just gave you is a very valid example, but we can poke holes in human in the loop as a safeguard. One of the holes we could poke in the example I just gave is the fact that in many cases, an individual doctor may not actually have the accuracy or the confidence rate in their past diagnoses as high as that AI system, right? That AI system may have access to a lot more data, actually, in many cases, if we're using it, we are probably using it because it can hit a 95% plus accuracy rate, where we find a group of doctors in general might be more like a 92 or a 93. But again, that's a group of doctors. That one human in the loop doctor might have an 8% accuracy rate. Now, we are still, as a society at this stage, if I can speak broadly, we are still more trusting of that human doctor to have that oversight than we are of that system. Okay. But again, there is a little bit of contradiction there. Some other issues that come up with human in the loop, and I'll just point out a few, but we should be aware of them. A very common one is decision fatigue. Okay, we have these trusted systems that are quite good. They're giving me all kinds of data all the time. The last 9 decisions I said yes to were right. The 10th one, I may be on hour 12 of my shift as a doctor.
Sure.
System's pretty reliable. It's probably good. That's decision fatigue. I may not have taken the time to really assess what I should and we are human beings, right? And we're being put in these high stress situations. So it is a real risk. And another one that's actually quite similar is algorithm bias, right? Again, you're that doctor who I have lots of experience. Maybe I do. Maybe I know that I have an 80% accuracy rate. Maybe I don't. So it's not necessarily that I have that in my forefront, but I'm starting to trust that algorithm more than I'm starting to trust my own opinion. If I'm on the fence, I'm going to lean towards what it tells me, right? So we can put a human in the loop and we can say that's a safeguard. We have to be realistic about the many risks, and I've only pointed out a few, of human error, right? And of situations where that human really is not better positioned as a safeguard. Now, I am not saying don't put a human in the loop. I'm saying when you look at your risks and when you look at your mitigation strategies, be very careful that you're also looking at the risks of human in the loop, that you are trying to account for that you are putting other safeguards in place, right? So we hear a blanket human in the loop as my solution far too often without actually looking at where that may fail. Human on the loop. So now we have human on the loop and human out of the loop, okay? Human on the loop is when our AI systems are able to perform autonomously and for the situation or the environment, we've decided that is that they are fully capable of doing that. So a common example, I'm not going to give one in medicine because medicine is so high risk that we really we want to avoid human on the loop and out of the loop as long as possible in those areas. So a common example would be autonomous vehicles. We are at the point where autonomous vehicles are highly capable. However, there are emergency situations and there are edge cases that autonomous vehicles don't know how to handle. And with that, a human on the loop would be a common solution. So this would be something like on the autonomy scale, there's a 5-level autonomy scale for vehicles. A vehicle that could be a level 5, which would be fully autonomous, is only run at a level 3. And the level 3 means, as the human on the loop, I'm not driving the car, I'm not controlling the gas, I'm not steering, but I have to have my hands on the steering wheel and I have to have my eyes on the road. So I can jump in on an emergency. I'm not making the decisions as we drive down the road. The car is fully able to do that, but I am a safeguard, and that is a valid safeguard. Certainly, we could say, humans have car accidents or humans make bad decisions, but I'm not going to make that argument right now. I'm just going to say that is a good safeguard in those situations. Human out of the loop is where we're going in terms of using AI on math, right? So to make a lot of decisions very quickly. Low risk examples are things like e-marketing. High risk examples are things like cybersecurity, where you need a lot of monitoring in the background and you need to respond immediately. So this system is smart enough to identify a risk and to stop it, but it doesn't have enough time to go back and say, does a human approve this action? So human out of the loop audits after the fact, right? And can make some changes after the fact. So that can happen. Yeah. So again, I won't apply them to medicine, but they do each have a place, and humans aren't perfect either. So they also have risks.
That's great.
I'll just pause in case you want me to bring that back to anything.
I think it's fairly thorough. Sue, is there anything that you wanted to add on any of that?
No, I think it was a great summary, as well as, really hitting the nail on the head on what those different definitions mean and how and when they can be used. Again, I think we're not quite mature yet to be completely separate or isolated from human decisioning, that's for sure. And, just going back to your autonomous vehicle example, Carrie, I think one of the things we also need to bear in mind is that there isn't regulation around what happens if there's an accident. What happens if, there's an injury due to autonomous driving? Who's responsible? Is it AI? Is it the human? There really isn't regulation around that yet. And those things have happened. That's the other thing. Those incidents have taken place. And at the moment, they've held drivers responsible for that. And again, there's education that comes into using autonomous driving as well, right? So what systems and what sort of learning is in place to take into account the use of autonomous tools and appliances and applications like, vehicles. So as much as, yes, we can do a lot with technology, with AI, with data, we also need to be sort of given the support and the guidance on when and how to use it. And should something go wrong, what are going to be the management criteria for that?
Yeah.
That's great. maybe I'll use the last few minutes to sort of take a look into the future and get some of your concerns specifically on AGI or artificial general intelligence. This is maybe first start by defining what you think of as AGI, because it feels like there's as many definitions as there are people that are using the term. But just give a quick definition of it, and then what additional complications from a ethical and responsible perspective would AGI bring with it? I'll reference I think it's on the New York Times bestseller list, a recent book that is titled "If Somebody Builds It, Everybody Dies." Just a subtle concern on AGI. Is that something that you share? Just elaborate on that. Maybe we'll start with you, Sue.
Great. So this opens up many doors and many interesting, points. The first one to me, AGI to me, again, is going into the perspective or the stream of superintelligence. And there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of conversations, and there's already innovation hubs being set up to advocate for this. But there was also a time where we spoke about supercomputing. And supercomputing, again, was something only, a specialized market of people or organizations could really access. It's still not that accessible. It poses a lot of risk, but also at the same time, things can go rogue. So superintelligence can potentially go in that direction, maybe not. Depends on how we mature the environment. But related to superintelligence is very much quantum mechanics and quantum computing. And you will actually need those capabilities, as well as the understanding of how the mechanics of quantum actually works. And it's, again, not quite accessible, not quite mature. There's still a lot of learning, a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of resources being used behind quantum as well. Again, whenever you come up with innovation in these sorts of areas, you need governance, you need guardrails, you need to also be able to enable the population to understand how to adopt it. So part of this learning, I feel, or this capability, is that it's going to open an avalanche of other opportunities, but also risks. So AGI is something I think I'm excited about, and I think definitely over the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a huge change, again, similar to generative AI. But with it comes a lot of change, and how we are going to manage that change, but also what does it actually mean to us and future generations, and more importantly, the environment. How much more resources is it going to take? And do we have the resources for that? And again, already the war on AI is there, where it's competing countries for who's going to be the best at AI. So in the future, We're going to be talking about the war on quantum. Who's going to be the best at quantum? And again, lots of conversations are starting to take place, but it's all sort of still very research, academic orientated, not quite practical yet, but we're not too far from the practicality of it. And my fear is that a lot of organizations and society, and even health in general, haven't quite caught up to AI. So how quickly are they going to catch up to quantum? Because the cost, the talent, not forgetting the talent and skills, is still something that's not quite there. And when it comes to AGI, I think one of the biggest challenges we're going to have is around talent and skills, and having the right people to drive those initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie, same question for you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so artificial general intelligence, as Sue said, super intelligence, right? This is the stuff of sci-fi. This is where those robots and computers in sci-fi movies can think for themselves, can make decisions. It's the idea of sentience, right? Of self-awareness that can go beyond what a human has prompted or programmed them to do. It's scary. And there's a lot of research that says, stop, we shouldn't be doing this. We are going to lose control. We have lots of examples where AGI will look at the final goal, but not make the decisions that the human would want along the way. So it may not be well aligned with human values. And that's one thing from a design and governance perspective that should be emphasized and is starting to be emphasized, is we need to build human values into these systems from a design and governance perspective. So there is a lot of promise, but there's also a lot of risk, right? And there, you mentioned there's a lot of researchers. You mentioned a book. We can look at one of our godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton. It has very clearly come to the other side and said, "Stop! We're not ready for this. It's going to take control. It's going to have a life of its own that we don't want it to have. We don't have the ability to control it in a way that would be safe." What I will say is, Sue brings up a lot of points and practicalities about how far in the future is it, what resources will it require, how will we be trained. All of that is real and important. So I will just look at indicators in terms of where we are today, rather than saying when AGI will come and what it will be. And what I'll look at is generative AI, of course, has been put in our hands quite broadly, accessibly, and quite quickly. What we're now hearing about is AI agents, right? This idea that that generative AI can complete entire tasks for me. It can make decisions. Again, if we go back to the human in, on, and out of the loop, it can make decisions without me involved at all. What we're looking toward are also multi-agent systems. So now I have agents talking to agents. They have different goals. They have, in some cases, different levels of agency or autonomy. So how much they're capable of doing and how much they are actually allowed to do without a human coming in and approving it or modifying it. All of this comes back to a big risk, and we've danced around this. It comes back to accountability, right? The reason we like the idea of human in the loop is because I can call the human accountable, right? I know how to do that. It fits into my current systems. The human may or may not be accountable in all those cases, but I know how to handle that, right? I don't know how to handle, I think Sue brought up, is an AI going to get fined or lose their license?
Sure.
Right now, they're not. Could an AI developer or an AI deployer get fined or have a reputational impact or lose their ability to operate? They could, but that is regulation. It's not broadly followed yet. So we have some examples in the EU AI Act where those guardrails are being put into place. They are being monitored. And from now up until 2027, those fines have already started, but they're going to be rolled out over that 2-year period with lots of notice on this is what the expectations are. This is how to design, develop, and deploy and monitor. And if you aren't meeting these requirements, you will be fined. You will lose your ability to operate. So those are some indicators of what we will be facing and how we could safeguard ourselves. But we're struggling with what we're facing today. And the AI agent risks in front of us are really quite extreme. So I'm not ready to look at AGI until we sort out what's in front of us. But I can say the risks for AGI are equal and greater.
Carrie, Sue, why don't we call it there? This was a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot, so thanks so much for spending the time. This has been another episode of the AI Revolution podcast and learning series, with our topic today being responsible and ethical AI. Up next, you'll hear from a panel applying these principles and others to responsible and ethical AI in healthcare. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.